Alright, welcome back to part 2 of my 3-part review of this Blu-ray from the Massive Cinema collection. This is Son of the White Mare and Other Early Works by Marcel Yankovic, or Yankovic. I don't quite know what the pronunciation is, and that part kills me, but we're going to move through it. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the first, or the biggest special feature on the release, the largest early work, and that is the 1973 film JÁNOS VITÉZ, or Johnny Corncob, translated to English. But I think that the more literal translation of JÁNOS VITÉZ would be John the Valiant or John the Hero, which is not to say that I knew any of that before I watched the film, because in the film you can hear them saying JÁNOS VITÉZ at a certain point, and it becomes a bit more clear where that kind of name comes. I don't know where the corn cob thing comes from, but it must be tied into the original text somehow, which is a poem that was, I don't know exactly, it was in the 1800s at some point that the poem was first written, but the film itself, JÁNOS VITÉZ, was made and produced and funded by the Hungarian government to be released on the 150th anniversary of the birthday, I guess, of the poet in question. And I've already forgotten his name. I tried to learn it, and I got so worried about pronouncing it correctly that I forgot. I'll put his name on the video. It's this poet, and he's obviously was a important figure, and they wanted to kind of mark his 150th birthday by releasing a film based on one of his poems, and not only just an animated film, but a feature-length animated film. This is the first ever feature-length animated film made in Hungary. So it was a pretty notable film, and it was very successful when it came out. It was seen by, I think it was like 1.5 million tickets it sold, something like that. Like, it was very successful for what it was. And Marcel was tasked with directing this film. There's a crew of about 150 people working on it. They spent 2 years making it. He was heavily influenced by the style of Yellow Submarine, which once you know that, you can see it. And even I, someone who's never sat down and watched Yellow Submarine, can tell the Yellow Submarine influences in this film's visual look, because it's just that film is just, it's an iconic look. And if you haven't seen it in full, you've at least seen parts of it, and you know what that film looks like. And I can see the shades of it in JÁNOS VITÉZ for sure. And 5 years previous to this, he had made a film which began his style, which we'll talk about in part 3. He made a kind of animated commercial movie for Air India. And that's where he first experimented with this style of kind of transformation within animation, objects that would transform into other things and objects. And that is very much prevalent in this film, JÁNOS VITÉZ. So it's about a man called Johnny Corncob, JÁNOS VITÉZ. He doesn't become JÁNOS VITÉZ until a ways into the movie, but this is about a man who is, from what I can tell, a sheep herder. And he has a woman that he loves, and he one day, because he's so wrapped up in lust and in love with this woman, he loses his sheep, and so he is banished from the village. He is sent away, and he goes off wandering, and he joins the army, and he goes on an adventure, and then finally he journeys home as a hero, to kind of go back to his love. I struggled with this one. I was really disappointed with it when I sat down to watch it, because I almost wish I'd watched this first before watching Son of the White Mare, because Son of the White Mare, which I covered in the previous part of this 3-part review. If you haven't seen that one, go back and check it out. I love that film deeply. It was an amazing film visually, and I just was so wrapped up in everything about it. So I knew not to expect that level of sophistication. Especially with this being the first, Hungarian animated film. I would imagine it's not going to be groundbreaking, cutting edge. Well, they spent years on it, to be fair. But this is a director who's still finding his feet a little bit, I suppose. But at the same time, there's some extremely accomplished stuff going on in this film. But there's also a lot of really rough around the edges stuff as well. A lot of like character designs that are they feel like Saturday morning cartoonish to me, and not in a bad way. Just very expressive, very cartoony, I guess, is the phrase that I would use. but all within this very transformative style that he had kind of begun for himself as an animator, as an animation director. You know, the way that he was designing these characters to be drawn and so on and so forth, and playing with colors. And there's a behind the scenes very short featurette on the Blu-ray that was filmed while they were making János Vitez, and he talks about, very young Marcel Yankovic talks about how they used like 600 colors for this film, and shows you very very quickly but very succinctly the process of animation, and you know, the doing the cells, and then the painting, and then the backgrounds, and putting them together, then the final process of celluloid, and so on and so forth. But you know, he talks about how, you know, there's no real colors for the characters because the characters' colors change all the time. And that's something I loved and adored about Son of the White Mare that is present in János Vitez. But it was the story that really threw me off, really. Like at the beginning, he comes across as a bit of a lech. To me, it seemed like this was just a girl doing a washing in the river, and he's just like, come to me. You know, he seemed like a bit of a perv, like, and it was very lust driven, and he's kind of almost just taking her for himself. And then it slowly becomes more of this just great romantic story. Wasn't sure if I was buying it so much, but I bought the romance more when he was away from her, I suppose. But at the same time, I do feel like this film, and it feels like I'm trashing it, it's a very good film. It's the middle section, I think, that suffers the most for me because I really disconnect from the main part of that story. So, you know, beginning, we set up him. They don't really set him up that well. But it's similar in Son of the White Mare. And these are two films that very much feel of the ilk of an old poem, a fable, you know, a fairy tale. It isn't a story with sophisticated kind of story beats and things that we're used to in kind of modern cinema. Well, not even just modern cinema, you know, just going back to, you know, how films began to evolve throughout the past 100 years in terms of the way that they would tell stories on screen through, you know, visual styles, but also the way that the stories are constructed. And these are very free flowing kind of, you know, just again, like the stories that you read when you're a kid, and you kind of fill in those little nuanced blanks with your imagination or with the visual that you're given in the storybook or whatever. And in that sense, I think this film really succeeds and soars because it does feel like a children's book come to life, and being an adaptation of an 1800s poem, I think it feels like that too. So I think that he did a really good job in conveying those things, but I wasn't grabbing onto the Johnny character. And then when he leaves after the first act and he goes out and joins the army, there's a whole sequence where he goes to a house where there's these really evil characters, and he has kind of showdown with them. He briefly joins them, and then they all get drunk, and then he leaves and sets the house on fire. I'm not sure if he set the house on fire, but the house goes up in flames. Very weird segment that really didn't tie into anything else in the film. He goes off and joins the army, which is kind of that propels him forward more in the story. But there's long songs and just lots of horses going across very nice landscapes. But it became more about the army and the collective than János Vitez or Johnny Corncob. And so I kind of almost forgot that there was this love back home until he kind of was pining over it at night in one scene. But you know, he at one point he kind of saves the day, and there's a big battle in France, and then he tells his story of this love that he has back home, and so they send him off to go back to kind of find his woman and be reunited with her. But once he started to tell them the story and they're moved by it and stuff, that's when I connected right back into the story. And from then on, the last 25 minutes, I was into the story. I was engaged with where it was going. And then I just thought the last 20 minutes were just fantastic. I wish the whole movie had been like, you know, that last 20 minutes, because it was more of a flight of fancy. It was like, now we're seeing János Vitez, John the Valiant, going off to kind of fight big giant kind of mountain monsters, and it's a bit more like outlandish and massive, and I loved all that stuff. It was a bit more fantastical in the third act of the film. So I really enjoyed that stuff, and the final like scene, I don't know if you call it the final scene, but the final section of this film was beautiful. I love there's an island basically that he goes to, and I loved everything about that part of the film, and every next step I enjoyed it more until the final shot, which was just beautiful. So for me, it really like dovetailed nicely towards the end. I just think that the middle was a bit, you know, the story didn't hold all the way through, I suppose. I feel like I'm being overly critical, but I have to say, and it is just also coming off of Son of the White Mare, I did feel a little bit disappointed because I felt like they could have, I don't know, it wasn't the same kind of film. Even though in a way it is, it feels like a fairy tale, a fable, but at the same time, the style feels kind of different too, obviously the visual style. Um, and you know, there isn't kind of the use of, you know, the rule of threes, which I mentioned that in the part I talked about Son of the White Mare, where it's like it felt like there was a rule of threes being employed. In one of the essays in the booklet, that is mentioned, and it's called something else, a triptych something or another. So it wasn't just, I mean, it's obviously there in the film that the three is a very important number and the repetition and all that kind of stuff. It's not like it's a unique thought that I picked up on, but you know, there was a more sophisticated word for it than just the rule of threes. You don't see that really in this film. But the more I think about it, the more I liked it, I think. And there's a line I'll probably mention in the next video too, where there's a great interview on the Blu-ray with the director, and he talks about how like for him the best films are the ones that stick with him. You know, they're the ones that, you know, the films that you see, and I'm not, this isn't what he said directly, but you know, the films that you see and you know the credits roll and then you leave the cinema and then you get on with your day. You know, that's, you know, that's just a film. But a real film, like a one that really kind of stays with you, and then you're wrapped up in the film in the coming hours and days and weeks. Like those are the films that he really values and thinks are kind of, you know, worth a lot. And again, heavily paraphrasing that, but that was the idea that he was presenting in this interview. And that's kind of happening for me with János Vitez. I think it's kind of it's permeating a little bit more in my mind. It's fermenting, I suppose, and it's maturing. And yeah, I have to say, when I was halfway through the film, I thought, I don't think I'll ever watch this again, you know, and it was a bit, I was disappointed. And you can get inside your own head when you're watching a film. You have preconceived notions of what it is, whether it's because it's an actor that you like or a director that you like, and maybe you're going in wanting to love it, and you're looking for reasons to love it too much, or you're going in wanting to dislike it to prove a point to someone. I mean, that's happened to me in my earlier days. Certainly, there's been like, well, the film can't be that good, you know, and you go and watch it, and you're like, you got your snooty hat on, but you know, I think with this, there was just, yeah, again, I wish I could go and see how I would have enjoyed this if I'd watched it first. That would have been interesting. But nevertheless, you know, I think some of the transforming scenes were really nice. But I also think some of the color design for me was a bit garish as well, and I didn't like that. I think, you know, Son of the White Mare, it feels kind of cosmic. You know, the way that everything seems to take place in the middle of like of space somewhere, and it's just this small but large environment that kind of makes no spatial sense. You know, but it felt kind of galactic. And but whereas Johnny Corncob felt kind of like, I don't know, and I'm not good with colors. I'm partially colorblind, and I was looking into that. I think I talked about that in the last one. And I don't know, it feels like when I think of the film, I think of like browns and like kind of orange and, you know, just a bit. I don't know. It felt very 70s to me. You know, it felt like looking at someone's kitchen in the 70s, like that kind of weird color design at times. There's some very beautiful color, you know, design in the film, and just, you know, some gorgeous shots and background pieces, and something that really clicked into place for me. I don't know if it must be the same in János Vitez, but at least in Son of the White Mare, in the booklet I was reading, that Marcel didn't like to use black outlines, because in animation you get this and you must know it if you've watched animated films or watched enough of them, at least the old one, like the traditional hand-drawn ones. When you see like characters on the screen moving and objects on the screen moving, they appeared slightly different in texture and feel, kind of, not literal feel, but kind of figurative feel, than the background art. So the background art is like a beautiful painted kind of constant, and then the cells are the things that move. And so I think that's correct. And so obviously they seem different. And one thing that Hayao Miyazaki did, the great Japanese animation director, he used to like put kind of objects on the screen that kind of have the outline, the kind of black outline, so that you think they're going to move. So you, oh, well, that's going to move in a second. That rock is going to move in a second. But then he wouldn't make them move. So then you stop thinking about that, you know, because it is a bit of a distraction sometimes when you see an animated film and then something's going on between two characters, and in the background there's this object that's the same kind of, you know, in the same space as those two characters. So you know that that's going to come out or something's going to happen with it. But Marcel, he dispensed with that. And so it kind of blends together in a way that you don't think about those things at all. And it's more time consuming, I think. Well, it is. It's not, I think that it is. It is. And I looked back again through Son of the White Mare, and I thought, oh God, yeah, that's one of the reasons why it's so unique feeling. You don't get those black outlines, and it really enhances it once you see it. It's like a kind of aha moment. And I'm pretty sure from memory, the JÁNOS VITÉZ is quite similar in that regard. And so there is this, you know, a different style to it than what you see in most animated films from that time period. Sadly, I can't say today because we don't get hand-drawn 2D animated films anymore, which is a great sadness to me. I think it's a dying art, almost a dead art, you know, at this point in time. I mean, who's really teaching that, and who's, you know, why would anyone be teaching it? Would anyone be taught it in the first place? Because it's not a part of the industry anymore, which is sad again. Anyway, so moving on from sadness, I like the film a lot, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again and thinking about it, and filming this review for it has made me want to see it again. And that's the stuff I like, is when I initially feel a bit on a film, and then it wins me over by the end, and then I start thinking, well, maybe I should reconsider the whole, and not maybe going with a kind of, well, this better be as good. And it wasn't like I was going in saying this better be as good as Son of the White Mare, but I was thinking like, oh, it'd be great if it was, you know. So I was really excited for this. But yeah, so that's kind of my brief thoughts on JÁNOS VITÉZ. But I think the story was more affecting in the third act, and just the more fantastical elements. I think his style, visually, and just the way the story is told is more impactful with fantastical elements, which is why I think the last 20 minutes were the best. But you know, there's things at the beginning where he looks over at his sheep and they're flying up into the sky like a tornado. And this is where I'm assuming he was a sheep herder, you know, so that there are the way that things are told visually is still quite fantastical in their own right. But that is purely just showing you that he's kind of lost track of his sheep, basically, in a more kind of magical realism kind of way in the context of this animated character, if that makes any kind of sense. And then at the end, obviously, there are literal fantastical elements in play, which I think is just much more in line with everything else. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm trying to think, there was something else, because it just popped into my head. I'm trying to grab it before it disappears forever. I was talking about the fantastical elements of the film and the sheep thing, and I wasn't sure about that. I think it's gone. I might remember it for part 3. Otherwise, stay tuned. We'll come back and talk about the other early works of Marcel Yankovic, and it's like Jankovic or something, like, you know. But I think Yankovic. Either way, Marcel, great guy, you know. Rest in peace. A wonderful animator, and we'll talk about his early short films and the extras on the Blu-ray, and my final thoughts on the Blu-ray and everything else, and what the transfers look like in the third and final part of this review. So thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.